She was 18 and had been made homeless by a note taped to her bedroom door. With no family to turn to, no plan, and only the $22 she had saved from odd jobs, she had just her grandfather's old whittling knife and a quiet determination. With 5 of those dollars, she bought a derelict farmhouse in a forgotten valley, a place the locals called haunted. But what no one in the county knew, what she would only discover by chance and by labor, was that hidden in the damp earth of the cellar was a secret that would not only change her life, but give it a foundation she had never known. For more stories of finding home in unexpected places, subscribe to our channel. Ilara was born in the flat, windswept town of Prairie Bend, a place defined by the railroad tracks that cut it in half and the grain elevators that were its only cathedrals. Her mother, Helen, was a woman who seemed to have been born tired, her shoulders perpetually slumped under the weight of a life she hadn't chosen but had quietly accepted. She worked as a bookkeeper for the town's only mercantile, her days spent hunched over ledgers, her fingers stained with ink. She loved Ilara in a distant, abstract way, like a character in a book she was too weary to finish reading. Her father had been a railroad man, gone before Ilara's first memories formed, a ghost conjured only by a faded photograph on the mantel and a pension that had long since run out. The man who took his place was Arthur Hemmings, a man of rigid schedules and quiet resentments. He married Helen when Ilara was 5, bringing with him a sense of order that felt more like occupation than affection. Arthur was a land surveyor, a man who measured the world in precise lines and right angles, and he saw Ilara as a variable he could not account for, a disruption to his carefully plotted life. He never raised his voice, never raised a hand. His cruelty was administrative, a matter of rules and subtractions. He subtracted her from family conversations, from small moments of warmth, from any sense of belonging. The only true warmth in Ilara's early life came from her maternal grandfather, Joseph. He had been a carpenter, a man whose hands, though gnarled with arthritis, could still coax beauty from a block of wood. He lived in a small house on the edge of town, a place that always smelled of sawdust and pipe tobacco. He was the one who had given her the knife. It was a Case Stockman, its bone handle worn smooth and yellowed with age. The 3 carbon steel blades sharpened down to elegant slivers from years of use. "A good tool doesn't just do a job," he'd told her, his voice a low rumble. "It holds a story. This one holds mine, and now it will hold yours." He taught her how to use it, not just for whittling birds and small, intricate animals from scraps of pine, but for practical things. How to notch a piece of wood for a joint, how to strip wire, how to sharpen a pencil to a perfect needle-fine point. He taught her to see the grain of the wood, to understand its tensions and its strengths. He died when she was 10, a quiet passing in his sleep, and the knife became her most sacred possession, a tangible piece of the only unconditional love she had ever known. After Joseph's death, the world of her mother and Arthur closed in, a silent, gray space. School was a place of rote learning she endured, but her real education happened in the workshop of Silas Croft. Silas had been her grandfather's friend, a man who seemed as old and weathered as the oak trees that surrounded his property. He was a widower, his wife having passed decades earlier, and he lived alone in a sprawling, slightly ramshackle house filled with clocks he'd built and furniture he'd repaired. Silas was a master of all trades, a man who could fix a sputtering engine, set a stone wall, frame a roof, and coax a dying orchard back to life. He was a man of few words, but he saw in Ilara the same quiet competence and watchful eyes he'd seen in his friend Joseph. He never formally offered to teach her. The arrangement simply evolved. One afternoon, she had been watching him reglaze the windows of his workshop. He didn't look up, just gestured with his putty knife. "Glass is set. Pins are in. Your turn to apply the glazing compound. Keep the angle low and the pressure steady." She picked up the tool and did as he said, her hand surprisingly sure. From that day on, she spent every hour she could steal at his side. He taught her the language of tools, the heft and purpose of each one. She learned the difference between a rip cut and a cross cut, the satisfying thud of a well-seated mortise and tenon joint. He taught her carpentry first, starting with how to care for the tools themselves, how to sharpen a plane iron on a whetstone, the oil smelling of metal and earth, how to set the teeth of a handsaw, how to hang a hammer so it felt like an extension of your own arm. He showed her how to read a building, to see its bones beneath the skin of plaster and siding. "Look for the sag," he'd say, pointing to a tired roofline. "Tells you where the load is failing. Could be a rotten joist, could be a weak post in the foundation. You don't fix the symptom, you fix the cause." He taught her masonry, how to mix mortar to the perfect consistency, like thick porridge, he'd mutter, and how to lay a course of brick so it was level, plumb, and true. She learned the feel of a trowel in her hand, the scrape and slide of it against the rough texture of the brick. She learned how to patch plaster, how to sweat a copper pipe, how to diagnose the ailment of a clogged drain by its gurgle. Silas never praised her with effusive words, but his approval was there in the small nod, the grunt of satisfaction, the way he would hand her a more complex task without instruction, trusting she would know what to do. He was teaching her not just skills, but a philosophy. That the world could be understood, that what was broken could be mended, that patient work was a form of grace. It was a world away from Arthur's sterile order and her mother's weary resignation. In Silas's world, Ilara was not a problem to be managed, but a capable pair of hands. The day she turned 18 fell on a Tuesday in late October. The air had a sharp, metallic bite, and the cottonwood trees had shed their last golden leaves. It felt like any other day. She went to Silas's workshop after her morning chores, and they spent the afternoon replacing rotten sills on his back porch, the air filled with the scent of fresh-cut cedar. When she returned home as dusk was settling, she found the front door locked. It was never locked. She knocked, waited. The silence inside was heavy, absolute. Taped to the glass of her bedroom window facing out was a white envelope. Her name was written on it in Arthur's precise, angular script. Inside, the note was brief. It stated that, as she was now of legal age, her residency in the house was concluded. A small stack of bills was folded inside the paper, $22, the exact amount she had given her mother for safekeeping over the years, money earned from mending neighbors' fences and sharpening garden tools. Below the typed sentences, Arthur had signed his name. Her mother's signature was not there. Through the window, she could see her single suitcase, a small canvas bag, standing by the door. It was already packed. They had gone through her things, selected what they deemed necessary, and cast out the rest. She did not knock again. She did not shout or plead. The cruelty was so complete, so administrative, it left no room for argument. It was a transaction that had been finalized. She reached into her pocket, and her fingers closed around the smooth, worn handle of her grandfather's knife. It was still there. They hadn't taken that. She picked up the suitcase from the porch steps, turned her back to the only house she had ever called home, and began to walk. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, lonely shadows down the empty road. She walked out of Prairie Bend without looking back, following the two-lane road as it unspooled into the vast, open plains. The sun set in a fiery blaze of orange and purple, and the sky deepened to an ocean of indigo pricked with cold, distant stars. The wind was a constant presence, a low moan that swept across the grasslands, carrying the scent of dust and dry sage. She walked through the night, the rhythmic crunch of her boots on the gravel shoulder, the only sound besides the wind. She was not afraid, not in the way most people would understand it. The quiet competence Silas had nurtured in her was a steady, low flame in her chest. She was cold, yes, and a deep, hollow ache had settled where her sense of home used to be. But her mind was clear, focused on the immediate physical facts of her situation. She had a bag with 2 changes of clothes, a bar of soap, a blanket, her knife, and $22. She had her own 2 feet and a body made strong by years of labor. These were the assets she inventoried as she walked. The landscape was stark and beautiful, a canvas of subtle browns and golds under the enormous sky. During the day, she watched hawks circle on thermal currents, their effortless glide a lesson in patience and energy conservation. She observed the geology of the road cuts, noting the layers of sediment and rock, a habit learned from listening to Silas explain the importance of understanding the ground beneath the foundation. She slept in abandoned barns and dry culverts, wrapping herself tightly in the wool blanket, her small bag clutched to her chest. She ate sparingly, buying crackers and cheese in the few small towns she passed through, making the money last. She moved west, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name, toward the dark, jagged line of mountains that slowly grew on the horizon. The journey was a stripping away of everything that was not essential. The girl who had lived in Prairie Bend, who had a mother and a room and a place at a table, was sloughed off with every mile. What was left was Ilara, a solitary figure moving through a vast landscape, her senses sharp, her purpose narrowed to the next step, the next sunrise. After 3 weeks of walking, she crested a rise and saw below her a small town nestled in a high valley, cradled by pine-covered slopes. A creek, sparkling in the late autumn sun, wound through its center. This was Redemption Ridge. It was a place that felt like it was at the end of the road, a town where people came to be forgotten or to forget. The buildings were a mix of sturdy log construction and clapboard storefronts with false fronts, all weathered to a silvery gray. She walked into the general store, the bell above the door announcing her arrival with a cheerful jingle. The woman behind the counter, Martha, was stout and gray-haired, with kind, weary eyes. Ilara bought a loaf of bread and a wedge of cheese, and as she paid, she asked if there was any work to be had. Martha looked her over, taking in the worn boots, the dusty clothes, the quiet self-possession in her eyes. "Not much work," she said slowly. "But there's a place, the old Holloway farm, been empty for 20 years. Nobody wants it. Say it's haunted." Ilara felt a flicker of interest. "Haunted?" she asked, her voice quiet. Martha shrugged. "Old Agnes Holloway lost her husband and her boy to the flu in one winter. Folks say she went a little mad from the grief, just vanished one day, left everything behind. The place has a bad feel to it, they say. County owns it now. They'd probably pay you to take it." The next morning, Ilara went to the county clerk's office, a small room in the back of the town hall. The clerk was a man named Abernathy, a fussy, balding man buried under stacks of paper. When Ilara asked about the Holloway place, his eyes lit up. He pulled out a large, dusty ledger and a rolled-up plat map. The property was 160 acres, with a farmhouse, a barn, and a few outbuildings, all marked as being in poor condition. "The taxes have been delinquent for 2 decades, he explained, almost giddy. "The county just wants it off the books. There's a $5 filing fee for the deed transfer. You pay that, and it's yours." He looked at her, expecting her to laugh or argue. Ilara simply reached into her pocket and placed a worn $5 bill on the counter. An hour later, she walked out of the town hall holding the deed to the Holloway farm. She walked the 2 miles out of town, following a rutted track that led up into a smaller, more secluded valley. The farmhouse stood on a gentle rise, overlooking the creek. It was a simple 2-story salt box, built of hewn logs chinked with crumbling mortar, with a steep-pitched roof and a wide front porch that sagged on one end. The windows were dark, empty eyes, several panes shattered. The barn, a larger structure 50 yards away, listed heavily to one side, its great doors hanging askew. But the bones were good. Ilara saw it instantly. The foundation was massive fieldstone, settled but not collapsed. The log walls were straight and true, the wood silvered but not rotted. The roofline, despite the missing shingles, was still a clean, strong line against the sky. It was a place built to last, a testament to the hope and hard work of the people who had raised it from the ground. Others saw a haunted ruin. Ilara saw a project. She saw a home waiting to be reclaimed. She walked up the porch steps, which groaned under her weight, and pushed open the front door, which creaked inward on rusted hinges, stirring up a cloud of dust that danced in the single beam of light piercing the gloom. The inside of the house smelled of mouse droppings, decay, and the deep, damp cold of long abandonment. But beneath that, Ilara could smell the faint, lingering scents of pine logs and wood smoke, the ghosts of 100 fires in the hearth. The layout was simple: a large keeping room dominated by a massive stone fireplace, a small kitchen area in the back, and a steep, narrow staircase leading to 2 small bedrooms upstairs. Everything was covered in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs. A few pieces of simple, sturdy furniture remained: a heavy oak table, a few chairs, a bed frame upstairs. It was as if the occupants had simply walked away in the middle of an ordinary day. Ilara spent the first few days just cleaning, a battle waged with a broom she fashioned from a branch and a bucket of water from the creek. She swept away the years of dust and debris, letting the pale autumn light into the house for the first time in a generation. She found a tattered calendar on the kitchen wall, frozen on November 1908. 20 years. Her first priority was shelter. She used her knife to cut shingles from the less damaged sections of the barn roof and patched the worst holes in the farmhouse roof before the first snows came. She used clay from the creek bank and dried grass to re-chink the logs, sealing the house against the wind. It was hard, lonely work, but it was work she understood. Her body ached at the end of each day, but it was a good ache. The ache of purpose. The cellar was the last place she tackled. The entrance was a heavy trap door in the floor of the keeping room. It opened onto a flight of steep stone steps leading down into the darkness. It was a root cellar, dug into the earth, with stone walls and a dirt floor. The air was thick and cold, smelling of damp soil. It was here, while clearing out the debris in the far corner, that her shovel struck something that wasn't dirt or rock. It made a hollow, wooden sound. Curious, she knelt down and scraped away the earth. She uncovered the edges of a wooden plank. It wasn't part of the construction. It was loose. Using the tip of her shovel as a lever, she pried it up. Beneath it was a small, excavated cavity, and nestled inside was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in oilcloth. Her heart, which had been beating with the steady rhythm of labor, gave a sudden, hard thump. With trembling hands, she lifted the box out. It was heavy. She carried it upstairs and set it on the oak table, the afternoon light glinting off its tarnished surface. After a moment's struggle with the rusted latch, she pried it open. The first thing she saw was money. Stacks of silver dollars, neatly wrapped in cloth rolls, and a small leather pouch filled with $20 gold pieces. She counted it slowly, her hands shaking slightly. It was over $3,000, a fortune beyond her wildest imaginings. But it was what lay beneath the money that made her breath catch in her throat. There was a letter, a thick sheaf of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon, and a small cloth-wrapped object. She untied the ribbon and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat, precise, the ink faded but still legible. "To whoever finds this," it began. "My name is Agnes Holloway. I built this house with my husband, Samuel, in the spring of 1888. We came from Ohio with nothing but a wagon and a dream of a place to call our own. For 20 years, this was our Eden. We worked this land, and it gave us everything. Our son, Daniel, was born in the room above, in the light of a summer morning. He was a bright, happy boy, with his father's laugh and my stubborn streak. The letter went on to describe their life on the farm, the changing seasons, the small joys, the relentless work. Then the tone shifted. In the winter of 1908, the influenza came to the valley. It took my Samuel first. He died in my arms, right here in this room, his breath a ragged whisper. 2 weeks later, it took my Daniel. He was only 10. I buried them both myself on the hill that overlooks the creek. After they were gone, the light went out of this place. The silence was a living thing. I stayed for a year trying to keep the farm going, but my heart was buried on that hill with them. This money is what we saved. It was for Daniel's future, for his education, for a life we dreamed for him. I cannot take it with me, and I cannot bear to see it fall into the hands of bankers and lawyers. So I am leaving it for the next person who comes to this place with hope in their heart. Perhaps you are young as we once were. Perhaps you are fleeing a sorrow of your own. Use this to build a life. Do not let this house be a monument to grief. Make it a home again. That is all I ask. Signed, Agnes Holloway. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, the first she had shed since leaving Prairie Bend. They were not tears of sadness, but of a profound and startling connection to this woman she had never met. She carefully unwrapped the small cloth object. It was a child's silver rattle, tarnished with age, a small dent in one side as if from a fall. It was Daniel's. She held it in her palm, its weight a small, solid anchor in the quiet room. Agnes hadn't just left her money. She had left her a purpose. The next morning, Alara walked into Redemption Ridge a different person. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a builder with a mission and the means to accomplish it. She went first to Martha's general store. With a calm authority that surprised even herself, she laid out a list. Sacks of cement and lime for mortar, a keg of nails, new window glass, a crosscut saw and a set of chisels, tar paper and shingles for the roof. Martha looked at the list, then at Alara, her eyebrows raised. That's a mighty big order, girl. Alara simply placed 3 gold coins on the counter. Martha's eyes widened. She said nothing, just nodded slowly and began to gather the items. The rebuilding began with the foundation. Alara, remembering Silas's words, knew that everything depended on a solid base. She spent a week on her hands and knees in the cellar, chipping out the old, crumbling mortar from between the massive fieldstones. She mixed the new mortar herself, getting the consistency just right, like thick porridge, and forced it deep into the joints with a trowel, her hands and arms covered in a fine gray dust. It was grueling, back-breaking work. One afternoon, an old man with a stoop and a face like a topographical map of the valley stopped by. He had been watching her from the road. "That's Jebediah," Martha had told her. "Best stonemason this county ever saw. Retired now." Jebediah watched her work in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Your mix is a little wet for this damp ground. Add another part sand, and you're holding your trowel wrong. You'll wear your wrist out, like this." He took the tool from her and demonstrated, his gnarled hands moving with an economy and grace that belied his age. He didn't offer to help, but he came back every day that week, sitting on an upturned bucket, offering quiet advice, until the last stone was pointed and the foundation was solid and true. Next was the barn. It listed at a terrifying angle, and Alara knew it was only a matter of time before it collapsed completely. She needed to lift the entire structure and replace the rotted sills and posts. It was a job too big for one person. She went to see Thomas, the town blacksmith, a quiet young man with powerful shoulders and soot permanently etched into the lines of his hands. She explained what she needed: heavy iron braces and a set of screw jacks. He listened intently, sketching her ideas on a piece of slate. "It'll work," he said, his first words to her. "But you'll need help. A lift like that is a tricky thing." The next Saturday, Thomas showed up at the farm not just with the jacks he had forged, but with 3 other men from town. They worked all day under Alara's quiet direction. She, who had studied Silas's every move, knew exactly where to place the jacks, how to crib the immense weight of the barn as it was slowly, carefully lifted, inch by inch. The air was filled with the rhythmic creak of the screws, the groan of old timbers, and the terse, functional commands of the men. By dusk, the barn was straight, resting securely on new, solid oak posts Alara had cut and shaped herself. The men didn't ask for payment. As they were packing up, Martha arrived in her buckboard, bearing a massive pot of stew, fresh bread, and a jug of cider. They ate together on the newly repaired porch of the farmhouse, the silence punctuated by the satisfying sounds of hungry men eating. It was the first time Alara had shared a meal with anyone since leaving home. Community wasn't declared. It was built, one shared task, one hot meal at a time. The work continued through the winter and into the spring. Alara reglazed every window, the panes of new glass sparkling in the sun. She and Thomas worked together to repair the well pump, its iron handle now moving with a smooth, silent action, drawing up clear, cold water. She stripped the old peeling paint from the floors and woodwork inside, sanding them down to the bare wood and finishing them with linseed oil, revealing the warm, golden grain of the 100-year-old pine. By the time the valley turned green again, the Holloway farm was no longer a haunted ruin. It was a home. Smoke curled from the chimney. A neat stack of firewood stood by the door, and the windows glowed with a warm, welcoming light in the evenings. The haunted reputation of the place had vanished, replaced with a quiet respect for the young woman who had brought it back from the dead with her own 2 hands. People in Redemption Ridge who had first eyed her with suspicion now greeted her by name. "Morning, Alara," they'd say, and she would nod back. She was no longer an outsider. A rhythm settled into her life, dictated by the seasons and the needs of the farm. She bought a few chickens from Martha, and their cheerful clucking now filled the yard. She tilled a small plot of land near the house and planted a garden with seeds she'd bought at the store: potatoes, beans, squash, the things that would see her through the next winter. Jebediah, on one of his visits, showed her how to build a small stone smokehouse, and she learned to cure the meat from the deer Thomas taught her how to hunt. She became part of the town's small, intricate economy of favors and trade. She mended a broken chair for Martha in exchange for a bolt of sturdy cloth. She used her whittling skills to carve a new handle for a tool for Thomas, who in turn forged her a set of custom hinges for a new gate. The house itself settled around her, its old timbers seeming to sigh with relief. It was no longer a place of ghosts and sorrow, but a place filled with the smells of baking bread, drying herbs, and the faint, clean scent of beeswax polish. She was not just living in the house. She was in a quiet conversation with it, tending to its needs as it sheltered hers. She had made Agnes Holloway's wish come true. It was a home again. One evening in early autumn, a year after she had first arrived in the valley, Alara sat in a rocking chair by the fire. The chair was one she had found in the barn, broken and discarded, and had painstakingly repaired. The fire crackled in the great stone hearth, the same hearth where Agnes and Samuel had warmed themselves, the same hearth that had witnessed a family's joy and its deepest sorrow. The house was quiet, a warm, breathing presence around her. The air smelled of wood smoke and the apple pie that was cooling on the kitchen counter. Through the window, she could see the stars beginning to appear in the deep blue twilight sky, the same stars she had walked under on her long journey. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out her grandfather's whittling knife. Its bone handle was warm and familiar in her hand. She looked at it for a long moment, this small object that held the story of the man who had first taught her the value of a well-made thing. Then she rose and walked to the mantelpiece she had built above the fireplace. On one end of the mantel sat the small, tarnished silver rattle she had found in the cellar. She placed her grandfather's knife on the other end. The two objects, one from the grandfather who had loved her and given her a foundation in skill, the other from the stranger who had loved a son and given her a foundation, in fact, seemed to balance each other perfectly. They were talismans from two people she would never see again, strangers bound to her by acts of love and foresight. She thought of Arthur's note, the cold administrative dismissal that had cast her out into the world. It had been meant as an ending, but it had been a beginning. It had sent her on a path that led her here, to this place of her own making. She was 18 when she had been made homeless. She had $22 to her name, and she had spent 5 of them on a deed to a ruin. It was the best $5 she had ever spent. The world is full of things that have been abandoned: houses, skills, people, dreams. But sometimes, all it takes is one person with patient hands and a willing heart to see the value that remains. What have you found value in that others have overlooked? If these stories resonate with you, consider subscribing and sharing this with someone who appreciates the beauty of a second chance.